They were making all these strides in the company, and the one and only thing he had people focusing on, this is the sole focus, there were no like crazy Gantt charts or whatever, was what gives you energy and what takes energy. Business is messy and unpredictable.
Sometimes lonely.
So lonely.
So lonely.
And inspiration can often come from really weird places.
We pick up where the bullet point blogs and the highlight reels leave off.
We start with the stories. Welcome back to So Here's My Story. I'm Jody.
And I'm Eliot, and we are live from New York.
Live from New York.
I love that beginning.
I wish we could pretend it was Saturday Night Live.
It is not Saturday Night Live.
It's actually better than Saturday Night Live.
It is NYC, which is the National Association of Broadcasters.
So for those of us who are here, for those of you who are here in the audience, most of you, let's face it, none of you know us. So Eliot is a business lawyer, and I run a company that offers leadership support.
And so what that means in translation is that both of us see pretty much everything in the world through a business metaphor.
So, okay.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
So, and how that translates into this show is that each episode we tell a story, and we try to bring you what we think are wildly successful, wildly useful business lessons from the absurd, from the poignant, and from the seemingly irrelevant.
Often quite irrelevant, but here's how that works. Here's how it works, though. So each week, one of us tells a story. We think it's going to be a wonderful story. It may or may not start out being about business. We never really know where the direction's going to head from there, but somehow along the way, we always manage to surface some really useful business lessons, actionable takeaways for business.
And that's because that's how our brains work.
That's how it works. So we were really excited to be here today. I was teasing Eliot on the train. We came up from Baltimore. I was teasing Eliot that we should arm wrestle about who gets to tell today's story, since it's like not our usual thing to be in a room of this many people.
Which really scared me, by the way. I'll just tell you
Arm wrestling?
Arm wrestling,
It should have. It absolutely should have.
I know it should
I would be telling today's story if that's how we had based it. But as it turned out, Eliot had snacks.
I did.
And so I traded snacks for the story time. So Eliot wins. I will say one more thing before you start and tell your story. We set up a special page just for today. If you're listening in and the show sounds interesting to you, we set up a page at sohere'smystory.com/NAB, and it has all the easy links to subscribe, to check us out on Facebook. We have a Facebook group of some really fantastic people, listeners to the show, where we all talk and you get like behind the scenes stuff. So why don't you go ahead?
So here's my story. And this takes us back to the holidays, actually. I had booked, for my law firm, I had booked a holiday party, this great restaurant. It was a private room, and I was really excited about that. And so we were getting ready to go. It was going to be the next day, and then it snowed. And it was not just snow. It was like the snowpocalypse. It just kept coming and coming down. So I called. If
I remember, it was that year that we had like 2 and 3 in a row,
it was
3
horrible.
feet, then 3 feet.
Yes, it was horrible. So I called the representative of the restaurant, and I said, look, we can't possibly make it. And she was very cool about it. I had to reschedule. I rescheduled our holiday dinner. And so the next day I rescheduled it, or for the next date, it snowed again. And it was, again, the snowpocalypse. It just kept coming down. So I called her again, said, hey, I'm really sorry, but look out your window. I got to reschedule. And she was really cool about it. What she was not cool about was returning my deposit when I was like, hey, you know what? It's February. The holidays are just done. Everybody's done.
You can't have a holiday party in June.
You can't. So just return my deposit. No, that's not how that works. So I decided to have a party. It wasn't a holiday party. But, and this is where it gets a little weird, so I'll just explain it. You know how if you've ever thrown a party, and let's say you're going to throw a party and you want 30 people to come. So you might send out invitations to 80 people. And each time you get an RSVP, for some people you get an RSVP from, you're like, oh, cool, they're coming, that's great. But some people, when they RSVP and they're coming, you're like, yes, right? There are those people. And so I've taken to think of them as like the fist pump people, those, yes, they're coming. So I decided that because I had a limited room, I would throw a party just for the fist pump people. That's all I would invite. Now, this was a business function, but I didn't care. I didn't care who could refer me business. I didn't care who was a client or who was already a referral source or something like that. I just wanted yes for every single one of them.
Spoiler alert, I was on the list.
She was definitely on the list. I won't tell you where on the list she
Hey.
was. She was first. But she was definitely on the list. And so I did. I had this, and the one thing about this party was, and I started calling it after this, there was no agenda. It was called the No Agenda Dinner. Because I wasn't setting it up that, oh, you should meet her because she could give you business or she could be this kind of contractor or supplier. I just thought that if I thought these people were cool, they would think that they were cool.
And actually, and being invited to that dinner, I think one of the cool things you did was when you sent out the list of who was coming, it didn't even say what company they were with.
No.
It just said Jody Hume, and then it said some fact about each person that was super specific. Because I remember mine was the only person in the world that the first time we met in person was a 5 a.m. Starbucks meeting.
Yes.
But when I read through the other things, I had something really interesting to talk to each. I'm like, oh, you're the person who chases bird dogs, or I know somebody had something about like dogs that chase rabbits or something. I don't know.
And actually, there was one really breaking, because there was one interaction you had at the No Agenda Dinner.
Yeah.
That really kind of summed it up for me.
It's funny. So I didn't know that this was a story you were going to tell, but I'm so glad you did, because there's so many important things about this that I refer back to quite a lot, actually, because, I'm somewhere between being an introvert and an extrovert, but especially in parties like that, I am very introverted. Like I don't want to talk to 27 people. More importantly, I don't want to talk about nonsense. And I met someone there. It was actually Tom Loveland, who I had heard his name many times before. Yeah. Other people had mentioned it, but we had never actually spoken. So I was excited to get a chance to talk to him. And we actually started off having this, I don't know how we started talking about the thing that was on the list. We were comparing notes about what was your thing. And so he was talking about his thing, and we were having this those conversations where you're just you're connecting with the person. You are feeling like something going back and forth between you. But then that dreaded moment came where we kind of ran out of things to talk about. And I can usually think of anything to keep the conversation going, but I couldn't in the moment. And so there's this long pause. And then I went with, so when did you start Mind Over Machines? A backup question of tell me a detail, blah, blah, blah.
Who are the best clients for you?
Yeah, I know. It felt gross in the moment, but I didn't know where else to go.
Right.
So Tom opens his mouth to answer, and then he just exhales and kind of slumps, and he goes, "Can we not do this?"
Which was the most brilliant response. You told me that, and I thought that was the most brilliant response.
I was like, no, I really don't want to do this, but I'm not sure what else to ask. He goes that's all right, let's just... And I thought it was such a great way to make a stand for genuineness in business. And it's why I actually like this story, because this is one of my favorite topics, whether we're talking about marketing or dealing with your staff or dealing with performance reviews or your own career goals, is you can't ever go wrong by leaning back towards being genuine and real and human.
Yeah, and that's what made these people the fist pump people for me, because I've had those moments with each one of them. And you said it resonates in a number of facets for you. It resonates for me because there are times, and you know this as well as anybody, there are times certainly for me when I get into this business depression mode where you're waking up again, and I like what I do, but you're doing it again, and you're doing it again, and you're doing it again. And I just have to break out of this. And so what I started to do was make sure that I start scheduling coffee. And I schedule coffee with the fist pump people. And when new people that I meet say, hey, so the typical business question, who can I introduce you to? Who's your ideal client, or who's a referral source? And my answer goes back to this. I'm like, no, introduce me to somebody cool.
Yeah.
Introduce me to, and I'll explain it, introduce me to one of those people.
Well, here's a really funny thing, though. I don't get into business depression from the doing it over and over again. Yeah. I tend to get into it when I haven't had enough actual connection time with people, where I'm just feeling I don't even know quite the word for it. I need to spend some. It's one version of downtime for me, where I just get to experience another person who I just love the interaction with them. So for me, taking that time, whatever it is that refuels you or kickstarts you or reinvigorates you, and for me it's those people. Where here's another way that it applies, though. This is a hard thing to deal with sometimes, but I have to pay attention. When I look at my calendar, and I meet with different leaders all day long, and when there's one or more people on that list where I'm like, oh, like, ugh. Like, I don't want to talk to that person today. I always let it slide once because I might just be tired. Like, if I'm depleted, that's one thing. But if that person if I'm not excited to see them, I have to deal with that. Like, I have to address that situation because it probably means we need to part ways as clients.
Well, and that does bring me to that point because, and you've heard me say this, I have never in my career regretted not taking on a client. I have never in my career regretting parting ways with a client.
Regretted not taking one. Yeah.
But I have often regretted taking one on. It's just like
if you're Eliot's client and you're listening,
yes, you've made the list. Just like Jody in the No Agenda Dinner, you've made the list.
Or
so
he
congratulations.
just hasn't told you that you're going to be fired.
Well, we have to talk. So there's that. But a lot of times it's just like looking at your calendar and thinking for the fifth time.
Yeah. No, so okay, I don't want to go down this rabbit hole right now, but now that I know this, because I was invited to the No Agenda Dinner, but I actually didn't know how it came to be. I didn't know there was like a series of other events. So there's part of me who someday you'll have
Plan C.
Yeah, Plan C. You'll have to tell me sometime how you let your employees know that they'd been uninvited from the thing. But that's a different story. I think that there's a couple, the people who attended that No Agenda Dinner more than just enjoyed themselves. I mean, there was something really important about the no agenda piece to it, which we've talked a lot about the people that came and the value of that. But there's something weird about business where there's like this unspoken something that everything has to have a really distinct purpose. Like almost like if it doesn't have a key performance measurement index, or if it doesn't have an exacting line to an outcome, that you have to ditch it. And I really, really have an issue with that. So
well, and I agree. And one of the ways that I think about this constantly goes back. I'll shout out to my friend who's a journalist, Neil Rubin. He wrote an article about the Jewish high holidays, and he was talking about, of course, the ritual and what goes into the service and all that. But the title of the article was "God is in the Hallways." Because what he loved about going to synagogue for the high holidays wasn't the stated purpose of each singular service, although I'm sure he loved that as well. It was in the hallways, in the white space between what was scheduled, because he got to see people and have unstructured conversations and whatever fellowship and just the sense of community. And that's where, for him, the holidays really struck home.
Yeah, so this is going to shock you, but I'm going to leap this off on a tiny bit of a tangent.
Wait, no. This show is nothing if not laser focused on its point.
No, but it's super, super relevant. So we're looking at it from this bigger picture standpoint, but you can actually take this entire conversation and reapply it in the way that a CEO or any leader spends their time and energy. Because I would say probably 70% of my conversations that I have with owners and entrepreneurs all day long, especially the kind of 911 calls like, I need to talk this through now, often come back to, they think there's an issue, but what is really at issue is some kind of energy management conversation. They are often exhausted or depleted or just not on their game. They're in a slump or they're fuzzy focused, or it comes in a lot of different ways. But it is often because they haven't made time for the hallways. Yes. The way you're talking about it. This is the other place that sort of messed up backwards, glitch in the operating system of what it means to be doing business, is that it always has to look like do, like outcome. And it's wrong. You end up with bone on bone instead of the cartilage that you need in those interstitial spaces to make time for we're actual smart, and this is not just my opinion, and this is, if it was, that's okay because it's my podcast, but
right, and it's a good opinion.
Of course,
you should be proud of that opinion.
No, but there's neuroscience here. You in order to have an aha, which if you're going to run a company, you have to be having insights on a regular basis. In order to have an insight, you have to have alpha waves present in the brain, which are more like relaxation. Right. It's why you get your best ideas in the shower,
or on the commute,
or
walking the dog,
or while you're walking the dog. It's because they're the few places that we are not just constantly thinking and being stimulated. So those times are not, they're not indulgent, they're not silly, they're not woo-woo. There is actually stack load of science behind why, renewing, sharpening your axe, as that old story goes, has extraordinary value. And sometimes that's with these like fist pump people, as you call them.
Well, and that's, when I started the story, I was saying, okay, this is what I do to break out of business depression. And at my office, there are a couple of people who help me arrange this. They call it a seizure, because every about 4 or 5 months, I'll send out.
Do you just start flailing in the office?
Yes, I start flailing. No, I'll send out like 50, no joke, I'll send out 50 invitations for coffee. And those 50 are for
I've been feeling a little protective about my time lately because I'm overbooked, and I just had like a physical reaction to 50.
And it stretches out.
Like,
no, it stretches out over months. They make appointments and we schedule times. And these are the people who renew me. And that's how I schedule time, although it's not, I'll grant you, in the shower, walking the dog,
Sure.
the commute home, all of those white spaces are incredibly valuable. But for me also, just hearing about cool people doing interesting things, walking around NAB, for example. Mm-hmm. As a business lawyer, all of this show is not what I do day in and day out. But look at all these people.
In fact, we know so little about a lot of the things that
I know, but they're so cool. And so many of these people are so engaged in it and love this stuff that just talking to them, you get kind of a high and you start become reinvigorated.
One of my clients' companies, like he was working with me personally, but then his company was engaged with another kind of executive coach, organizational development kind of person, and they were making all these strides in the company, and the one and only thing he had people focusing on, this is the sole focus, there were no like crazy Gantt charts or whatever, was what gives you energy and what takes energy. And that was the framework for which they did everything. And then as much as possible be choosing from what gives you energy. And if there's something that takes energy from you, because there's a difference between hard work and taking energy. Like really hard work can give you energy if it's the right kind of work. So it's like what gives you energy and revs you up, and what just drains you. Because if it's on that drains you, then can we find another way to get that on someone else's plate? Because it might be something that gives energy to somebody else. So that was I thought that was fascinating. Everything came through that filter.
It is, but what struck me though is, to get to that meaningful conversation, so you put those questions, what gives you energy, what takes energy from you in front of people.
Who gives you energy and who takes energy?
Okay, but so it's interesting because if you come into those questions cold, it's just like asking my assistant, if I ask her a generic question, what do you want to be in a couple of years? How can I help you? What are your aspirations? What interests you? A lot of times staring at that blank sheet is really intimidating.
Yeah.
It's really hard to do. It's just like if you're giving a workshop and you want audience interaction and you ask people, hey, who here is a dog person? It's easy to have hands raised because there's no judgment. It's an easy decision to make.
Dog person?
But
we just happen to have a live studio audience.
That's right. I keep forgetting. I should have just asked the question. So, but if you say, well, tell me something really private and personal about your psychological makeup. It's like crickets.
Well, let's try it and see what happens.
But the point is, if you come into that cold, you've got to prepare people so they not only have a mindset, not only do you have a mindset to listen, but they have a mindset to share that and to hone in on that. Mm-hmm. And you do that as a facilitator.
Sure.
You have to break through and get there. And I'm just wondering, how do you get people to get that, to have that conversation?
About like what gives you energy?
Yeah.
Well, I think it's like anything. You have to connect them to something that actually gives them that feeling. I mean, you have to poke around for it, because I can't answer that question for anyone. I can't even give them an example that I know will resonate.
Right.
You have to ask questions, and I mean, if we were doing it right here, I would just, I would point people back to some part of the conversation. I would have been, if I were facilitating, I would have been watching as we talked for when someone's like shaking their head yes, of like, oh yeah, I get it, I know exactly what you're talking about. I would pull them back to that moment where they're physically feeling something that I know that they're picking up what I'm laying down, and then you build off of that.
And so what I think that does though is, so you have this preamble, you have this whether it's a presentation or a discussion, where people get a chance to register as to how they feel about something. Mm-hmm. And you can gauge that reaction and point them back to it. And so to me, what that means is there has to be a relationship. So I can't just go into my staff and say, what how can I help you be what you want to be, or have one of those discussions.
Now I got to tell you, you lost me there for a few minutes.
I could tell that I lost you there.
Could you see the panic in my eyes? I'm like, I don't know what you're
panic is a strong word. I could tell that if I went, and so Jody, what do you think about that? That would be the wrong move.
Yeah, I was like, I know he sees a thread here, and I'm trying to find it back. So now I see where you're going with this. Right. You can't, I think this is part of, okay, now I'm back on board. This is why I think part of what you like and why the fist pump people are so important, because they're much like those friends you haven't seen since high school or college that you can just pick right back up with. You don't have to start from the testing it out, finding your way. They're the people who you've already to me it always feels like there are people for whom your puzzle piece and their puzzle piece just go click. And they always go click when you meet. And then there are other people who you're like, okay, maybe nope, not there. Does anybody have a pair of scissors? Maybe we can make this work. So I think what you're referring to there is that when you've built that relationship in a way that the word that keeps coming up is connection, where there's a genuine sense of connection. I think that just is what, for a lot of people, gives them energy. And that one, I think, does cross the board between introversion and extroversion, because we're not talking about, while your No Agenda Dinner was a small group, we weren't, you made it possible for us to connect in a very one-on-one way by having those introductory, another way in besides, so when did you start your company? What do you do for a living? It was...
Right, so there has to be something, and while I agree with your analogy about the puzzle pieces, it's not just visible, because you don't get a chance to look across the room and say that puzzle piece is going to fit with me.
Oh, never.
So you've got to create the space for that to happen, and the whole point that I think you and I both got to, not only I got to it with the No Agenda Dinner, but also in this podcast, is that there has to be a point beyond so what do you want as your ideal client? Right. So how do you create that connection? I mean, that's really what I was struggling with in the dinner. Totally.
And you did it very well in the dinner. I think that the other place that this is so applicable is anything that's even remotely related to performance. I'm not even going to use the word reviews, because I really don't like official performance reviews.
Yes. And I say that as a lawyer, I hate performance reviews.
No, performance reviews are the worst. And they're not very effective. And I think it's because they echo at that level of, so what do you do for a living? It's really hard to get again, there's a lot of neuroscience behind that, what your brain does when it feels like your value's threatened. It really cannot have a super nuanced conversation when you're feeling like, but, having just real, it's such a platitude of a word, like a real, genuine, authentic conversation. Those words are super overused, but they're where it's at. In that No Agenda Dinner, you made it possible for us to connect at a real person-to-person level, and in performance reviews, when you can do that, what do you care about? What's important to you? Are you enjoying this in a way that you're just really trying? To me, it's just, the difference is in trying to navigate a conversation, just as opposed to just trying to understand someone.
Well, because often, and I think this is the key, and this is what worked with the No Agenda Dinner, that what obscures connection is often these canned questions, but what forges connection is a story. So that's our story.
But the discussion doesn't have to end here.
No, it does not.
In fact, we don't want it to.
No, we don't.
That is why we actually have our private Facebook group,
which we started to make sure that we could get your comments, your rants, your thoughts,
your stories.
You
can find links to that group, as well as show notes and links to subscribe via email, and how to find us just about anywhere you can possibly find podcasts at sohere'smystory.com.
And you can also find us on Facebook and Twitter at SHMS Podcast.
And since we know it takes a village.
Yes, it does.
We'd like to thank our village, our super talented, incredibly patient team.
And occasionally snarky team.
Yeah, but in the best of ways.
Lovingly
snarky.
Yes.
Good mockery.
So a huge shout out to the people who actually help us produce our show. First, our sound engineer, Tom Hansen.
Thanks to Christy Schmier for our brilliant show notes and all the other fantastic writing she does for us.
And to Taylor Mathauer for doing just a little bit of everything.
Including wrangling us.
Which
is no small feat.
No, it's not.
This is Jody Hume.
And I'm Eliot Wagenheim.
And you've been listening to So Here's My Story.